In this episode, I'm with Jay Abraham, the GOAT of marketing.
There's a phrase that transcends through almost anything in business or in life, and it's the reason why. If good intentions ruled the world, we'd all be Alexander the Great. It doesn't matter what the intention is. What matters is what's the effect it produces. The big problem most people don't realize, you could have 10 million people following you on whatever you want, Instagram, but they're not 10 million people. They're 10 million individuals connecting with you, one human being at a time. A life unexamined is a life not worth living. And so you have to be able to understand there's lots of different realities going on in a business concurrently. And you have to be mindful of what they all are and how they all interrelate.
Everyone wants to be great, but only few actually get there. And I'm on a mission to find out what all the greatest have in common. I've traveled tirelessly to find, sit down, and talk with GOATs, people that are arguably the greatest of all time at what they do. Sales, marketing, advertising, business, podcasts, branding, you name it. The way they do things may be different, but they all seem to see the world the same way. To them, success is not only achievable, but inevitable. And we'll get inside their heads as they share their expertise with me each week. My name's Mike Arce, and this is The GOAT Show. This episode is sponsored by Loud Rumor. If you own a fitness studio, cryotherapy, or massage business, there is no company in the industry better at generating high-quality leads than Loud Rumor. In just the last 2 years, Loud Rumor has worked with nearly 1,000 fitness and wellness companies and won ranking Arizona's Ad Agency of the Year in 2017. Getting more paying members in the door can be tough. Let Loud Rumor do the heavy lifting and get new people in your doors every day. Go to loudrumor.com and learn more. Also sponsored by Agency GSD. Starting a digital agency was definitely one of the best decisions I've ever made. Building it, however, was a lot more challenging than I expected. I always wish someone just gave me a roadmap that I could follow and just let me be a fly on the wall at the successful agencies out there so I could really see how it's done. Agency GSD allows you to do just that. Stop playing small and visit agencygsd.com to learn how to help hundreds of clients get it to 7 figures and be extremely profitable along the way. Again, go to agencygsd.com.
Jay, thank you so much for taking the time to invite me.
Oh, come on, my pleasure. What a opportunity.
Well, your reputation's been incredible since before I got my hands on your book. I've heard about you from so many different people, and then when I read Mr. X, which was just one of the best gifts I've ever been given by Russell Brunson, because I think you guys worked out a deal to where it can get into the inner circle group.
Yes.
And I'm a part of that group. That was the most addicting book. Like, I couldn't put it down because every page was just another lesson. And that made me realize why you were a legend. Everyone was saying you were a legend, but I never got a chance to get, like, everybody was so broad with the info. And then I got in deep, and it's like, you really understand marketing to its core. And so we are here together because you are, in not only my eyes, but the eyes of many people that have introduced me to you, the GOAT of marketing, greatest of all time.
Well, it's very flattering. It's the acronym's a little bit unusual, but it's still an honor. Thank you.
It is. Well, I want to go into a few different things with you, but before we actually dive into the things that may be working today that have been working for years. That's something that I know you're really passionate about. We talked about that. I want to talk about how did marketing even enter into your life? Where did it begin for you?
Sure. It's accidental, but it evolved very rapidly. I started my life professionally very young. I was 18, got married, had 2 kids, no education, the needs of somebody 40, nobody cared. The only people who gave me opportunity were entrepreneurs who gave me the chance to create revenue, business, buyers, and be paid a share of that. And when you only eat when you earn, you find out very quickly what works and what doesn't and what works better. And I became very focused on correlations, but I started jumping. I was very, very curious and bored, and I would jump from one industry to another to another. And after about 5 of them, I realized that people in industry A don't have a clue how people in industry B, C, D, E think. They don't understand the different strategies, the different revenue models, the different marketing approaches possible. And it's not because any one is better or worse. They just have different sort of default methods that they use in systems. But you can take elements and you can combine them into hybrids, introduce them into industries that have never been exposed to them. And it gives outrageous superiority if you can think about the one-eyed man in the land of the blind. And I started doing that. And the more I did that, the more I wanted to learn more things I could do. So I kept expanding both in industries, but concurrently picking the mind of everybody I could who was an expert in any category of revenue generation in those industries. And I kept adding it, so to speak, to my knowledge base, and it sort of compounded. And then fast forward 1,000 industries later, I have a context that's not arrogant, just clinically is vast and deep and very, very diverse. And then you can start borrowing elements that are universal, that you know will work in almost any situation. And then I got exposed to meaningful ways to put the work of geometry behind business, to make the same effort, the same expense, the same access to the market, the same salesperson, the same amount of real estate you purchased as far as an ad or a message produce many times more. And you start looking at all the multiplication. It started exciting me. And again, I don't know, it just sort of happened.
Now, one of the things you said was, when I got in, I realized that people didn't know about this and didn't know about that.
Yes.
How did you know about that? Because in order for you to know that they don't know it, you've got to know it.
Well stated. So I have always been, I just whistled when I was talking. I have always been blessed in a very unusual way. When I was young, I was never arrogant. I was always humble and curious and energized and driven in a charming enough way that entrepreneurs found me fascinating enough to invest in and to share perspective. I fortunately either self-selected or was blessed by being mentored by entrepreneurs who understood pieces of the puzzles. Some understood that industries, that clients in industries, because some were B2B, some were B2C, were underserved and they filled pieces of the puzzle. Some realized that everyone in their industry was pretty much the same and they wanted to add more value for the end user. So I learned value creation. Some of them were very, very aware of what was early in the game, not even called LTV, but marginal net worth, the lifetime value. And they understood yield. And I learned how not to look at just revenue less expense, but the ongoing residual value that a buyer can be worth over a period of time. Others were really into lead generating and variability. And I learned that all sources aren't the same, all types of buyers aren't the same, and that anybody who allocates a percentage of their marketing or just a budget figure is either spending too much or too little and concentrating on too marginal or not the right amount of opportunities. And I learned all these things from people that were really wise. And then as I got more and more successful, I was invited into organizations where people who were very bright would really mastermind before masterminds were even known. They didn't have names like today, but they understood pieces of the puzzle. And because I transcended many, many, many industries, I was able to get all kinds of filaments that would come together into really meaningful fabric that I could understand. And then concurrently, I studied massively all the original thinkers in the field of direct response marketing, people who were charged with the responsibility of spending $1 and getting back a result. And they had to understand the psychology, the science, the motivating factors of human nature, which is immutable. And I learned from classic people, Claude Hopkins, David Ogilvy, George Hotchkiss, John Caples, Victor Schwab, a lot of people, Robert Collier, people who were very, very masterful at a time when they didn't have technology. They couldn't use graphics. They couldn't use sexuality or anything else visually. They had to be able to paint a picture on the canvas of the mind, and it was a very powerful training. But over a lot of different exposures to a lot of different very, very, very bright people, I guess through osmosis, I was very fortunate.
If you took one of those guys that, let's say, was doing marketing where they literally had to tell a story, put on a canvas of the mind, like you said, back, when would you say that was? What year would you say was like the peak of that?
Oh, I think it was,
these guys?
Well, I didn't meet with some of these were deceased, but probably the golden era would be the 1930s through the 1950s, where they discovered, maybe early 60s. They just
when Mad Men started, like Madison.
But even before that, because Mad Men was more institutional.
Right.
These people, the real brilliant thinkers, had to really understand the acquisition cost, conversion, percentage of people who are going to do different product services. But these people propelled all kinds of companies. They had success stories from number 9 to number 1 in 9 months by doing this. And I studied them very, very, very ardently. And I tried to translate what they stood for in all the businesses that I ran. And it made a very big difference.
So this is a question I actually would love to get your answer on.
Surely.
So today we've got a lot of people that are using Facebook ads, Instagram, YouTube, all these things that didn't exist 10, 15 years ago,
yes,
like we do today. And because of the way they're set up, they're getting results without really studying that stuff.
Yes.
Right. So a great story on like the guy on Instagram, the guy who founded Instagram, when he went to learn how to use a camera, he bought this amazing camera, and the professor came over in the first day of class, took the camera away and gave him a plastic camera, like a disposable. He said, you have to learn on here first,
yes,
before you can get to use this, because you have to learn the art of actually taking photos. So these people back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, they understand how to tell a story. Do you think they would easily outperform if you were able to put them in a time machine and bring them into today's world, given all the resources, having now the combination of creating the story on the canvas of the mind with the outlets?
They would kill. And I can give you an example of that. 2 days ago, a very interesting woman you might want to meet. There's a woman named Mary Lou Tyler. Do you know who she is?
I don't know.
She and her partner wrote 2 books. One's called Predictable Revenue, and the other's called Predictable Prospects.
I've read Predictable Revenue.
And they're the ones that are credited with taking Salesforce from being basically a tool for small businesses to elevate them to enterprise level. And she was here a couple of days ago, and we were talking, and she came from direct marketing prior. Mm-hmm. And she said everything she does is just adaptation and modification of everything she learned before, taken to this, and communicating with people, one person at a time. The big problem most people don't realize, you can have 10 million people following you on whatever you want, Instagram, but they're not 10 million people. They're 10 million individuals connecting with you, one human being at a time. And I think that one of the things you brought up is one of the great tragedies. When anything works in the beginning, you don't really have to understand intimately the interaction you're having with your audience. You can be pretty superficial and still make a lot of money. I'm old enough to remember when infomercials first came out. Nobody knew what they were, so almost anybody who bought time and put anything of any consequence on made money. Right. When search first came out, when anything first comes out, when people started selling courses online, all they had to do is have some hyperbolic headlines and a bunch of cool sounding bullets.
Right.
And phrases, you're going to make $1 billion. It's it's going to do it. You're going to do it quick. All these same things. Well, today, a lot of that is marginalized, justifiably and deservedly, because you have to really appreciate the depths and the dynamics of the individual you are talking to, and you can't do that if you don't take the time to examine and explore and understand and comprehend what they're going through, what their values are, what's happening in their life, whether you're sending them this or whether you're trying to communicate with them. And the more today people can grasp that, the more powerful and the more prosperous they're going to be.
If you were going to sit down with a company right now,
yes,
and you were going to, let's say you'd be able to ask them a total of 3 questions.
Okay.
And with those 3 questions, you have to make a decision whether or not this would be a really good company to market, like they've got a good foundation, or there's a lot of work that needs to be done. What are 3 questions that you would
That's great.
feel like you need to ask?
Well, the first, one of the, there's a phrase that transcends through almost anything in business or in life, and it's the reason why. If you look at anything, what's the reason why you do something, don't do something, are attracted to someone or not? Mm-hmm. I'd want to know, what is the reason why someone should buy your product or service from you and not your direct competitor or an alternative provider, or do nothing, just not buy and amend it. And why should they do it right now? If you can't answer that powerfully, clearly, tangibly, and in ways that are not just vacuous, most people will say, well, it's service, dependability, and quality, which means absolutely nothing. If you can't really articulate reasons why that are compelling and are graspable and dimensional, then I don't want to work with you unless we have a lot of capital and a lot of resources to figure it out. Number 2 is, what do you want your product to be seen as in the life or the business of your client that's different? I want people to think transactionally, and I want them to think transformatively. In other words, if you are selling training, and we can take it either way. If you're selling training to a trainer, or you're selling training to a gym, I don't want you just to think in terms of you helping that trainer be more successful or that gym have more members. I want you to be able to have the kind of a connection where you fall in love with the end clients that your client is going to serve. I want you to think about all the men and women whose lives are going to be improved because that trainer is more effective or successful. All the people are going to feel better because they're going to look better, going to live longer, going to have happier lives. They're going to feel more self-conscious or confident. They're going to have better romance. They're going to, all these things. And I want to be able to take you all the way through to the outcome. And I want you as a client of mine to think in those terms. If all you think about is, we want to make more money so we can sell more trainers, then I don't want anything to do with you, because that's not where you really ace it. You ace it by saying, we want to help more trainers, transform more lives every day. Because when we do that, the connection will be so strong, and the effect we are going to help them create will be so preemptive and defendable that we will have a relationship with them for life, and they will have a relationship with their clients for as long as human. Does that make sense?
100%.
But it's a different attitude. I don't know if I'm giving you answers you want.
Clients.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think Russell Brunson talks a lot about that too. And, really, who's your customer's customer?
Yeah.
And when you can get that deep, you can actually share that vision with your client.
When I, excuse me for stepping on you, but when I work with a client, that business isn't really who I'm representing. I'm representing the people they are selling to. I'm representing the people they're trying to sell to. And with luck, I'm representing the people they used to sell to and no longer do, but should again. Right. And I'm that advocate. And if I can't be the advocate to their market, nothing happens. So I'm more focused on seeing what it's like in the eyes of the prospective market, as opposed to what my client wants. Because what my client wants can only be fulfilled by first understanding what either void or what under fulfillment is going on in the market through competition. Just a lot of things like that. I don't know if I'm giving you answers you like.
Yes. No, this is exactly.
I'm a little bit abstract, but I don't mean to be.
It doesn't, but it's all what
sure.
I'm looking for. So
yeah, go ahead.
So what I noticed in your book, and I don't know if this was led because you felt it was most important or if you just felt it was a way to transition best, but you started everything off with talking about marketing constantly to your existing customers, people that have already paid you money. And I know that right now, there's a lot of people that are constantly chasing new business. And it's all about getting new leads and getting new business in the door. When you've got a book of business already that you may even be losing and constantly refilling on this side, I would love for you to talk to me about, your thoughts overall on what should a business really be focusing on when it comes to their existing customers, and what things should they be putting in place
That's great.
in order to leverage that?
Sure. I've got a multitude of perspectives on it. The first thing is there's a tragic delusional assumption that people make that the moment that they secure a buyer, a transaction, that buyer is going to be with them forever and they don't have anything else to do except for whatever the random superficial communication they send out. And you're right, they spend all their time and the effort targeting all these new ones. Well, first of all, it costs a fortune. Yeah. Time, effort, capital, trust building to secure that first transaction. If you know how to solidify it authentically, and you know how to constantly enrich and nourish it and nurture it, it costs you nothing except for real commitment and contribution to bond and fortify that relationship for a very long period of time. Properly nourished, that relationship has the ability to be worth many, many times more in long-term yield. It has the ability to be worth enormously undervalued referrals, word of mouth. It has the ability to buy a lot more things from you, even if you currently don't have them available, because you can gain their trust and you can partner with lots of other things. But all that stems from first of an attitude that has to be predicated on, I'm going to invest more after I get you as a client than I even did to get you as a client. And most people don't look at it that way. They almost, I mean, it's hilarious. You give preferential deals to new people, and you penalize people who trusted you. Right. And you understand that you're offending me when you do that. There's a couple of different schools of thought that I happen to like. One is critical thinking, and an extension of that is consequential thinking. Being able to think, what are the implications, the consequences, the impact, positive, negative, of doing something, of not doing something, of an action and inaction. And if you don't really learn to think that way while you're out there trying to solicit or seduce new buyers, you could be prejudicing, you could be offending, you could be demeaning, you can be subordinating, you could be really, really rudely disrespecting all the people that have been loyal and bought me. So you have to be able to understand there's lots of different realities going on in a business concurrently. And you have to be mindful of what they all are, and and how they all interrelate, the ecosystem. And it's very delicate. And a lot of people don't. They almost disrespect their buyers the moment they get them.
And I don't think people do it intentionally. I
No.
don't think they know they're doing it, but I think
The perception, though, we have to
Of
understand,
course.
doesn't matter. I mean, if good intentions ruled the world, we'd all be Alexander the Great. It doesn't matter what the intention is. What matters is what's the effect it produces. And if the effect is intentional or counterintuitive or outright offensive, I mean, it's a lot of people don't think before they act.
Right.
The corollary is far too many overthink and never act. Somewhere in between is reality.
Right. Well, it's good though, because, I'm hoping the people because I know for me, I'm thinking about it differently. Obviously, when I read through, I got the understanding of like on the numbers side and how it makes sense for the business and for the customer, for us to spend more time here. But I think what drives a very different type of behavior is just that paradigm shift of now I look at it so differently. And so I think people that are listening here, if they got what I just got, it's going into that mindset of like, man, if I work this hard to get them on board, and then after that, I just go and work hard to get other people on board and I work less once they're here, that is disrespectful. That's almost demeaning. I'm belittling the relationship. It's a trick. Why did I even do it? And but I think if more people could think that way, because I don't think I know they don't want to be that way, their behavior will naturally change.
Yeah, well, I think that you're introducing a very appropriate and profound distinction. People are not taught to understand a couple of things. One, it's much easier and more enjoyable to deal with satisfied, trusting clients. I call them clients, not customers, than it is to try to win the trust of apprehensive, uncertain prospects.
Right.
So if you think about it, most people spend all their time and effort out in this very, very, what's the word? It reminds me, pardon?
Noisy.
Well, it's not just noisy, but it's sort of like a jungle.
Yeah.
It's fraught with danger and intrigue and pitfalls and swamps. And that's where we're trying to create trust. And people don't realize that it is the hardest thing in the world to create. I mean, most people don't understand when you're trying to build new buyers, you got to start by targeting what, depending on the product service you're concentrating on, the most viable source. Now you got to get that source interested enough to want to initiate a relationship. A relationship is not yet a trusting one. It's sort of a apprehensive, let me see, maybe. You got to go a long way from that point of limited trust to absolute trust when transaction money changes hand. Although over here, you've already had that. Unless you really botched it up,
Right.
Whatever initial transactions you've had, if you appreciate and celebrate the value of that buyer relationship, they at least got what they expected. And hopefully, if you understand being preeminent, you over-delivered, either over-delivered intangibly, tangibly, something that made them very, very impacted positively. So you have the easy ability to sustain that relationship. And every time you sustain it, it's more profit. It's profit that didn't cost you the enormous cost of acquisition
And
time. It is, each one builds the trust. I mean, it's pretty interesting when you look at the psychology and the dynamic of what's really going on from more of a, not a nuclear, but if you have somebody step back and analyze what's really happening here, because I don't think the majority of people in business grasp it. And that's tragic because they work so hard to bring somebody in and then they basically work so little to keep them. And working isn't really, I mean, one of the things people don't understand, it has nothing to do with what you say. It has all to do with the value you keep creating for them. And value is denominated many ways. So you have to understand what the market you serve or the segments of market, you might have 5 different ones, value the most. not what you value, because that has nothing to do with me. I may be giving you right now cool things that I value and think are just outright brilliant, and you're thinking, I don't want to be rude, but nobody's going to understand that because it's too esoteric. So alignment of value is the first thing you have to understand. It has nothing to do with what you think people love or like or will appreciate or will genuflex because it's so cool. It's what they value.
So it's actually, I just saw a quote from Mark Zuckerberg of what he had said, and he said, people don't care what you say, they care about what you build. And that correlates so much with what you just said, right? Like you can say this, you can say that, you can say that this is what's important, but really it's what you're building for people is why they continue to stay with you or add more things, get more things. And Apple, I think, has done that, right? Like where you just, if you're an Apple person, you want the watch, you want the iPad, you want the TV, you want the pencil, you want everything.
No, I agree. But I think it's important that we recognize there's another element in marketing, selling, whatever you want to call it, business building. Human beings are inherently selfish. We're self-consumed. It's about me, me, me. So you can't fault human beings for being human, but you have to factor that self-interest. It doesn't mean they don't have gratitude, doesn't mean they don't have appreciation, doesn't mean you haven't given them value, but it means that memory is very, very, very short-lived. That's why you have to think of a bicycle, even in 10th gear, you do have to keep pedaling.
Right.
And people don't understand that in our world today, there's probably less retained gratitude. And it's not really a criticism of humankind. It's just a clinical assessment. Our brains are so battered with so much stimulus and clutter and noise and disruption and appeal that our ability to retain gratitude and appreciation gets very rapidly diminished. When that happens, it doesn't presuppose, it requires the entrepreneur, the business owner, the professional to constantly be literally re-nourishing that awareness, re-stimulating that appreciation, and it can only come from providing value.
Right. That's interesting. So
do you disagree?
No, I 100% agree. And I think with the companies that and not just companies, but people that I've coached with, like I've hired them as coaches or anything like that, the people that I stick with the longest are the people that they're there. They'll send me things when I can tell they're thinking of me. They'll send me an email saying, hey, I read this article, totally thought of you.
Yeah.
And it was like, I can't leave this guy, because he's not thinking of me when my credit card didn't go through. He's thinking of me for no reason.
Right. And the greatest testament of somebody's value to you and where you really delineate is when there's nothing for you to gain.
Right.
When there's something to gain, including you said that credit card doesn't go through, you want to get paid.
Right.
But when there's no economic benefit today, it doesn't mean you're not playing a long-term game. We're all playing a long-term game. And it's an ethical game, but it's a game.
Right.
And most people don't play long. They play short and they play limited, and they never get out of the minors because they don't understand really what the game is all about. But the first thing is you want to be so deeply entrenched in the mind and the awareness of that person relative to whatever the impact of your product or service is. So every time they wake up and they look at themselves in the mirror and they see their abs, or the woman sees her curves, or they feel pretty damn cool in their dress or in their tights or whatever, you want them to think, hey, I did it, but my trainer helped make it happen, or I wouldn't have done it.
In me.
Yeah.
The fact that he believed in you or he saw it made you feel like you can get this done.
Yeah. Now I'll give you a counter, and you didn't ask this, but it's quite interesting. One of the people that I unknowingly had impact on, and I'm actually fascinated by it, was the founder of Planet Fitness.
Really?
And he felt that people who weren't beautiful, people who weren't, bulging muscles, still needed to feel like they belonged, like they weren't outcasts.
Right.
It's a different kind of acknowledgement where he created a safe harbor for them.
Right.
So it only shows there's different realities all over, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. And I think Planet Fitness, they do like Pizza Fridays.
Yeah.
Pizza and beer Fridays.
Yeah. And if you grunt, you're out.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. If you grunt too loud, or you drop, the barbells, or you do anything that would be normal in the context of a serious gym,
like a Gold's Gym,
you're out.
Yeah. Wow.
But they want you to feel good about just being part of it.
Right. Right.
But again, those are different realities. And one of the things people don't realize is one size doesn't fit all. Mm-hmm. Everybody's unique, and there's different, within a business, you can have different categories of buyers, different sources of buyers, different value-based buyers. And if you don't understand what you're dealing with, you're not asking this question, but it's a very fascinating little insight. You can never optimize.
Right. And to talk about giving more to your customer and constantly building more for them, the phrase, the expression, I took a page out of your book. Yes. I literally took a page out of your book, and I created a library of resources because you said on this page, if you can educate your customers, your business will soar. That's what you said in the page. If you can continue to educate your customers on why and how, your business will skyrocket. And then you broke down a little bit more, well, definitely in depth, as to how this is helpful. And then we took that information. But for everybody else, talk to me about that, like educating your customers, your clients. How does that help your business take off?
Well, there's 3 or 4 different facets to that, and I will try to explore all of them, or at least a couple of them. There's regular education and there's preemptive education. So preemptive education is really interesting. And there's a story we tell that's old, but it's really cool. And it's from one of the people that we were talking about earlier. And he was always brought in to turn around struggling businesses. And many, many years ago, when he was alive, he was brought in to turn around a beer manufacturer called Schlitz. And Schlitz was in Milwaukee. And he was very, very detailed in his protocol. He wouldn't help anyone unless he first visited them and saw what reality was like in their business. So he goes to this is very interesting, goes to Milwaukee. He starts by getting out of his car, and they were on the banks of, I think, Lake Michigan. Is that where Milwaukee would be? And this was many years ago when water was very nice. And he was fascinated because here's the lake, was reasonably clean water, but 500 feet from the banks, they had 2 5,000-foot artesian wells. And he was fascinated. Why in the world would they have those when they could draw from that? And they said, no, the kind of beer we make, it has to have this kind of a mineral content. Then they took him inside and they showed him the yeasting room where they had the mother yeast cell that was a result of 1,487 different experiments to find the perfect balance of bitter, sweet, foam, bite, everything. And that fascinated him, that it took that many tries to find that kind of balance. Then they showed him the distillation rooms that had 9-foot thick glass walls, and the same mineralized water that was coming from the artesian wells was vaporized, liquefied, vaporized, liquefied, vaporized, liquefied, something like 8 times. And he couldn't understand. They said, even though it has the right mineral content, there are certain impurities we have to purge out so it won't compromise the integrity of the beer. Then he went to the bottling plant and was amazed. They sanitized the bottles not once or twice, but 10 times, twice with 2,000 degree steam, twice with chemical dips. I don't remember the rest. Then he went to the actual bottling plant, and all those disciplines notwithstanding, they were rejecting at least 1 out of every 12 batches. And we got through the whole tour, and by the way, heretofore, the whole industry was using as their mantra, our beer is pure, no explanation, nothing. He said, oh my God, you've got to tell the story of how you make your beer. Nobody understands that. And they said, well, it's awkward because that's how all beer is made. And he said, no, nobody tells the story. Right. The first one that walks the consumer through that process will own their mind share. And he did it, and they went from number 9 to number 1 in 6 months. That's preemptive education.
Have you ever watched the show Mad Men?
Yes.
I love that show. In fact, my dog's name's Draper.
Okay, that's great.
And I remember the episode that got me hooked was just on what you just said. Because I didn't watch it from the beginning. Okay. I caught an episode.
All right.
And then I went back to the beginning. But the episode was, I can't remember the name of the cigarettes, the brand they were wanting to promote. But in the episode, the cigarette company was in a hysteria. They were freaking out because now there's Surgeon General warning out. All about getting cancer. Nobody correlated cancer and smoking before.
Right.
Now it's there. And so they were wanting to fight it with like medical data that it's not true. And he said, well, tell me how you make it. And then he goes, well, we do this, we do that, and then we toast them.
Toasted.
Toasted. He goes, well, everyone toasts their cigarettes. He goes, but you're the one saying it.
That's exactly right.
Everyone's doing it.
And that's a true story.
That's amazing.
But the more you can do, you can turn whatever you do into a proprietary instead of a generic commodity. You win. Now back to education. That's preemptive education. Very powerful. Gives you distinction. Gives you positioning, gives you differentiation, gives you a potential moat. But regular education has a different, I've done a lot of work, it's not in the book that you referenced, but we've done a lot of work on what's called the strategy of preeminence. It's how to elevate yourself into the elevated strata of being seen as the most trusted advisor in whatever it is your product or service does in the sector, the only go-to source, the only viable solution that they could possibly choose. And one of the elements is the more I educate you to appreciate elements of the product or service, elements of how to maximize the use of the products or service, so there's things about it you may not need so you don't waste money. The more knowledge I give you, the more full understanding I provide, the more confidence and certainty you have about making a decision. And that certainty is ascribed or connected to the person that took the time to liberate you from ignorance. Does that make sense?
100%.
If you look at third world countries, people that liberate get foisted on shoulders and either made presidents or they get their heads cut off. Usually it's the former, because people feel like they've been liberated. Liberation is giving me knowledge that gives me the sense of power to make a decision, because I don't feel confused, I don't feel intimidated, or the knowledge not to do something because I don't need it. You can say, you don't need that. You don't really need, do you really need circulated air-conditioned seats in your Mercedes? Maybe, but it's $7,000, add-on that they're packing into your lease and you don't even know it. Do you really want to pay for that? Yeah. Maybe. I mean, does your ass get hot? Right. But I mean, I'm giving you an analogy.
Of course.
And if you do, and what happens is with knowledge really is power, but it's empowerment to a prospective buyer to feel comfortable about going ahead and making a commitment because he or she feels like they are completely understanding the game they're playing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And, we talk about educating the customer so they know how to use a product better and all that. It's interesting, and I'll still use the software, but what got me to start using Infusionsoft about 8-9 years ago, I remember I met with a salesperson. Okay. I was kind of into it. I heard marketing automation for the first time through them. Right. So there goes preemptive, right? I never heard that phrase before, and they owned me with that. And then, but I still wasn't fully in, and he invited me to the conference. Infusion Con was what it was called at the time. And so I went to the conference. It was coming up, and I saw all these people on stage that were winning awards on how they were able to grow their business using the software. And they showed examples of their campaigns and how deep you can go. And they were just regular guys. They weren't techie people. They weren't crazy analysts. They were like me. And so I was able to like see it. And I
and they demystified it.
Right.
And they showed all the benefits it would bring you. And they showed you how not complicated, but how easy at least the fundamentals were.
And how powerful it could be for your company, your customers, your employees, so many things. And needless to say, I got involved. I signed up. I started building up my own campaigns. I got really into it. And I've noticed that, I still use the software. I like the software, but I've noticed they've stopped doing a lot of that education. They stopped doing the conferences. And I've noticed that's opened up the doors for some other competitors to come in.
What happens often depends on management, depends on marketing, but because so few companies really do measure and analyze not just conversion, but the quality and the residual value and the lifetime value and the upsells of different categories of sources. Sources means, where did it come from? Did it come from an ad? Did it come from a training? Did it come from a webinar? That a lot of people default towards trying to look cool, or they default towards things that seem more immediate, and they don't really appreciate what the residual value of certain types of marketing or selling are. That's why analytics, that's why quantification. I mean, I came from a background where I was taught that it's a quote that's translated. Socrates said something wonderful. A life unexamined is a life not worth living. But a business that isn't constantly examined and re-examined from as many focal points as can be measured, quantified, and also extrapolated is a business not worth owning, because you can make marketing do so much more. You can make a buyer do so much more. You can make access to a market do so much more. You can make a sales call do so much more. You can make an initial purchase do so much more. But if you don't know what's possible, and you also don't know how what you are currently doing is doing, or if you're treating every kind of buyer, every source of a buyer, every piece of marketing you're using, and every proposition the same, you're either over or underspending, first of all, and you're almost always not undermining. It sounds, you are undermining yourself, but you're not mining the real gold that exists in all that ore.
Right. So all this stuff's great. And obviously I got value from your book already and random interviews that I've heard like this, but you were on other people's show. I heard John Lewis Howe's, and that was a great one as well. If I want to get more like Jay, where would I go to be like, what are the best resources, or what are the best ways that I can learn some of your best stuff and I can start putting in my business?
Well, I'm going to answer you twofold. If you're large enough and you have the resources, you can get the real Jay. I'm expensive, but I work with clients long-term, short-term, for profit sharing, all kinds of things, but they have to be large. For smaller companies that are really not capable of affording us, we've got a pretty cool resource. It's called abraham.com/50 shades, 50 shades. And it's got about 800 hours of video and audio. It's got about 4,000 pages of material. It's got Tony Robbins and I doing problem solving, Daymond John and I doing problem solving. It's got 4 full-length books. Right now, it doesn't even ask for an opt-in. It will soon, but there's not one thing on it that sells anything, and it's our attempt to be the contributor and the investor to help every business be not just as successful as they can be economically, but as preeminent as they can be as far as value contributors to their market. And it's there gratis, and it's got probably better stuff up than most people sell. We had a very traumatic event a couple of years ago. I found out that 187 separate pieces of my bodies of work, my IP, were being freely file shared by people all over the world, and we were selling $5,000, $25,000 products and programs. And it crushed me, but instead of being angry and wanting to vanquish the world, I thought, okay, if that's the game you want to play, we're going to contribute freely. Better products, better programs, better instruction, better resources gratis than most people sell. And we started doing that. We pretty well are known for that, but they can get that either without an opt-in or soon with an opt-in, but it doesn't require anything. And then we have expensive programs. We have entry-level programs. I have group events that are makeovers. We have long-term, and then I do very expensive six-figure consulting. But most people aren't going to be of that ilk, and they can go to the website, or they can go just to abraham.com, 50 Shades, and they can have a field day for a long time that costs them nothing.
That's great. Okay, last question to close out.
Yes, sir.
You've met a lot of interesting people in your life.
Yes.
Some you're still very well connected with. So with that, if you were able to have dinner with any one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Wow. Because I'm obsessed with Socratic interviewing and with discovery, I would want to meet and talk to Socrates. But that's just me, because I think that if you really want to own the mind share, you learn Socratic interviewing, you learn listening, you learn how to ask meaningful questions of others. And I don't think most people have a clue what that entails. And it's really the fast track to great bonded, fortified relationships with everybody.
I agree. Jay, thank you so much, man. This has been awesome.
You're welcome.
I learned a lot.
Oh, gosh.
Tons
My pleasure.
Before I met you, and now even more. So thank you for everybody watching and everybody listening. We just spent about an hour with a GOAT. So Jay Abraham, the GOAT of marketing. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for joining us today. If you like this episode, subscribe to our YouTube channel or find our podcasts on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever your favorite place to listen to podcasts might be. And if you really like this episode, please leave a review for us on iTunes. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.